Perm, Russia, September 19, 2025, Russian President Vladimir Putin traveled deep into the industrial heart of the Ural Mountains this week, paying a high-profile visit to one of the country's most storied military plants. His stop at the Motovilikha military equipment factory in Perm carried both symbolic and practical significance. It was not just another routine inspection, but a carefully staged message, both to Russians at home and to the watching world, about the Kremlin's intentions for the future of its armed forces. Inside the cavernous workshops of the factory, Putin was greeted by rows of armoured vehicles and artillery shells gleaming under fluorescent lights. Engineers, workers and plant managers stood at attention as the president, dressed in his characteristic dark suit, walked slowly through the assembly lines. The Motovilikha plant, with its long legacy in Russia's defence production, has become a focal point of the Kremlin's push to sustain and modernize the military amid the grueling conflict in Ukraine. This was not just a factory tour, it was a stage for a declaration. Speaking to employees and cameras, Putin reiterated his central message: Russia's military power will not fade even after the conflict in Ukraine ends. We will continue to develop the armed forces, make them modern, compact and powerful, Vladimir Putin declared, his words echoing through the factory hall. The visit unfolded with deliberate choreography. Putin's motorcade pulled into Perm under tight security, the streets cleared for his arrival. Cameras captured him inspecting armoured vehicles freshly rolled out of production lines, artillery shells neatly stacked, and workers huddled around him in small groups as he stopped to exchange words. Shot after shot emphasised the industrial might behind Russia's war effort. Wide frames showed tanks, armoured carriers, and artillery lined up in perfect order. Close-ups captured Putin in conversation with engineers, his gestures alternating between stern instruction and casual familiarity. But the imagery was only one part of the message. The rhetoric carried weight, and the president ensured it would dominate the headlines. Putin's remarks underscored a key point. While Russia hopes the current war eventually concludes, its demand for military preparedness will not. I hope and expect that these events related to the special military operation will end, but that the demand for modern armed forces will not disappear, Putin said, referring to what the Kremlin continues to call a special military operation in Ukraine. He followed with a direct assurance: on the contrary, we will continue to develop our armed forces, making them modern, compact and powerful. For Putin, this statement was not just a promise, but a declaration of continuity. The Kremlin wants to show that even if battlefield operations subside, military modernization will remain a permanent feature of Russian policy. Another important segment of Putin's speech focused on the defense industry itself. Standing before the assembled workers of Motovilikha, he stressed that the war has stretched Russia's defense enterprises to their limits. Currently, during the special military operation, the production capacities of the defense industry are being fully utilized, Putin said. The statement carried dual meaning. On one hand, it was praise for the factory's relentless output. On the other, it acknowledged the strain placed on Russia's industrial base by nearly 4 years of continuous war. But Putin sought to reassure workers that planning extended beyond immediate military needs. At the same time, we must plan more clearly and in the long term the production of civilian and dual-use products at defense enterprises, he added. This pivot reflects Moscow's effort to balance military output with civilian economic needs, a balancing act that has only grown more delicate as sanctions bite and international isolation deepens. Putin's choice of location was not accidental. Perm, situated in the Ural Mountains, has long been one of Russia's key defense and industrial hubs. The Motovilikha plant itself dates back to the Tsarist era, once producing artillery for the Imperial Army and later serving as a backbone of Soviet defense output. By visiting this particular facility, Putin reinforced a narrative of continuity, the idea that Russia's military strength is rooted not only in modern innovations, but also in a long and unbroken tradition of industrial might. The presence of workers in factory uniforms, standing shoulder to shoulder with the president, projected a message of unity between leadership and the working class. It also sought to reassure ordinary Russians that their sacrifices and labor are recognized at the highest levels of government. At home, the speech comes at a time when Russians are grappling with the dual pressures of a protracted war and the economic toll of Western sanctions. Factories like Motovilikha have seen demand skyrocket, but civilian industries often suffer from shortages and declining output. Putin's remarks about dual-use products signal an awareness of these tensions. The Kremlin is attempting to assure the public that military expansion will not permanently overshadow civilian economic life. Yet, for many Russians, the reality remains stark. Bread and butter concerns about inflation, job stability, and access to consumer goods are directly tied to the war effort. Internationally, Putin's words are likely to be interpreted as another sign that Russia does not intend to demobilize or scale down its military posture, even in a post-war environment. The phrase modern, compact and powerful suggests a vision of a streamlined but technologically advanced force capable of rapid deployment and sustained influence. For NATO and European policymakers, the message is clear. Russia will remain a military heavyweight on the continent regardless of how the war in Ukraine concludes. Analysts note that such statements are intended not only for domestic morale, but also to deter adversaries by projecting long-term resolve. The video footage of the visit, released by Russian state television and distributed via the VGTRK pool, reinforced the themes of strength and endurance. Putin was shown examining armoured vehicles with a sharp eye, pausing to nod or point as workers explained production details. He walked past stacks of artillery shells, symbols of both destruction and industrial discipline. The climax came during his meeting with the State Military Industrial Commission, where officials gathered around long tables to discuss production strategies. The optics of leadership surrounded by his top defence planners further bolstered the image of a commander-in-chief in full control of both battlefield and industrial fronts. Putin's insistence that Russia will continue to build a modern, compact and powerful army after the Ukraine conflict ties into a broader narrative he has been advancing since the war began in 2022. The Kremlin portrays the conflict not as a temporary crisis, but as a historic turning point, forcing Russia to prepare for a world of permanent confrontation with the West. By highlighting the full utilization of defense industry capacities, Putin acknowledged the intensity of current demands. But by emphasizing long-term planning for dual-use production, he sought to reassure citizens that Russia's future will not be solely militarized. Ultimately, the visit to Perm served as both reassurance and warning. To Russians, it signaled that their sacrifices would not be in vain and that the state intends to remain strong and secure. To the international community, it carried the unmistakable message that Russia's military ambitions will outlast the current conflict. In one of his most pointed remarks, Putin concluded, "I hope and expect that these events related to the special military operation will end, but that the demand for modern armed forces will not disappear." The words may have been delivered in the industrial city of Perm, but their resonance is global.
Стволов артиллерийских орудий из гражданских.
Да. А вот это гиацинт.
Уже в следующем году здесь будет 242 робота, 10 тысяч.
Добрый день. Сейчас, когда заболеваем, обороты тоже. Когда тяжелые времена наступают, в современных вооруженных силах на этом не закончится. Наоборот, мы будем и дальше развивать видом вооружения по некоторым изделиям. Вы уже знаете об этом у нас.
Вас пригласить в качестве желанного гостя к нам. Вы...
Спасибо большое, прошу вас. это назначение генеральных конструкторов по созданию вооружения. Создан целый задел, приличный, хороший задел. И это также рассмотрено на недавнем совещании в Самаре руководством ОДК.
I hope and expect that these events related to the special military operation, the term used by the Kremlin to designate its offensive against Ukraine, editor's note, will end, but that the demand for modern armed forces will not disappear. On the contrary, we will continue to develop our armed forces, making them modern, compact and powerful. Currently, during the special military operation, the term used by the Kremlin to designate its offensive against Ukraine. Editor's note, the production capacities of the defence industry are being fully utilised. At the same time, we must plan more clearly and in the long term the production of civilian and dual-use products at defence enterprises.